sometimes the loudest endings don't come with a scream. They come with silence, with two people walking away quietly, knowing they gave everything they could. Nicole Kidman didn't lose love. She outgrew the version of herself that needed to prove it. For nearly 19 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban looked like the couple who had everything: love, talent, and a kind of unshakable grace that rarely survives the spotlight. From glittering red carpets to quiet family strolls, they seemed untouchable, a living postcard of Hollywood devotion. But behind the flashbulbs and the designer gowns, something delicate was beginning to tremble. According to Reuters, after almost 2 decades together, the pair quietly separated in late 2025. The announcement was calm, respectful, even gentle, but those few lines said more than they appeared to. It wasn't just another celebrity breakup. It was the end of a story that had carried real emotion, real battles, and real sacrifice. Because behind every picture-perfect marriage, there's a private truth that only 2 people ever truly know. And in Nicole Kidman's case, that truth had been quietly shaping her for years. To understand why this ending still feels heavy, why the silence around it seems to echo louder than any public statement, we need to go back to the night when everything began. It started not with headlines, but with a glance. Los Angeles, 2005. The annual G-Day LA Gala, a celebration of Australian talent abroad. The ballroom shimmered with soft lights and polite applause. Nicole Kidman, already an Academy Award-winning actress, had been living a careful kind of peace, a woman rebuilding herself after heartbreak and the relentless glare of fame. Keith Urban, meanwhile, was the rising star of Nashville, a country music prodigy whose songs carried both swagger and sorrow. They met not on a film set, not through publicists, but as 2 Australians far from home, 2 people who instantly recognized something familiar in each other's loneliness. In later interviews, Nicole described that night with a rare kind of vulnerability. She said she felt something immediate. No scripts, no cameras, just a connection. Keith would later recall that he was too shy to call her for months, afraid of what that kind of magic could become. But when he finally did, everything changed. A year later, in June 2006, they married in a candlelit ceremony in Sydney. It was intimate, heartfelt, and deeply personal, a ceremony filled with hymns, laughter, and quiet hope. No reality show. Cameras, no sponsorships, just 2 people daring to believe in love again. For the public, it was enchanting. Hollywood had its new golden couple, the poised movie queen and the soulful country singer. On the red carpet, their chemistry was effortless. Nicole Kidman's smile was soft but steady. Keith Urban often stood just a little behind her, a quiet protector. He would hold her hand, whisper something, and she'd laugh, the kind of unguarded laugh that told you this was real. The world adored them. Magazines called them the perfect pair. Interviews framed them as proof that love could survive fame. And for a while, it truly did. But love, especially under the bright lights of Hollywood, isn't built to live in constant applause. Behind the radiant smiles, there were already small shadows that would soon grow darker. Keith was always on the road. Tours, award shows, late-night studio sessions, the rhythm of a performer who owed the world his best self every night. Nicole was balancing motherhood, film shoots, and the weight of global stardom. Their schedules collided, their homes became airports, and their moments together became fleeting. They were still in love. But sometimes love alone isn't enough to protect 2 people from the distance that fame quietly builds between them. And just months after their wedding, that distance was tested in a way neither of them could have predicted. 4 months after they said "I do," their fairy tale began to crack. Keith Urban was fighting something far more dangerous than the glare of the spotlight, a private addiction that had followed him long before the fame. In October 2006, as his career reached new heights, he made the difficult decision to check himself into rehab. The announcement stunned fans. The same man who had just serenaded his new bride was now confronting the battle of his life. Nicole Kidman didn't hesitate. According to multiple reports, she staged a quiet intervention and stood by him through recovery, even though their marriage was barely 4 months old. This wasn't a crisis handled for cameras, it was love lived in real time. Keith would later say that Nicole saved my life. He described those years as the darkest of his career, a time when he nearly lost everything, including her. For Nicole, it wasn't about image, it was about loyalty. She canceled appearances, turned down projects, and shielded him from the curiosity of tabloids. She chose to fight beside him, not because it was easy, but because she believed love was worth the fight. But that kind of devotion has a cost. Keith later admitted that his addiction blew our marriage to smithereens. Yet what the public didn't see was how fiercely Nicole tried to pick up those pieces. Her patience became his lifeline. Her silence became her armor. To the outside world, she was still smiling, elegant, radiant, untouchable. Inside, she was learning what it really meant to love someone in their darkest hour. Those early years weren't filled with scandal or betrayal. They were filled with endurance, two people trying to rebuild something fragile while the world kept watching. And even after Keith left rehab, the road ahead was anything but simple. Recovery isn't a straight line. Keith Urban's honesty about his struggle would later become part of his identity as an artist. His lyrics grew more personal, his performances more raw. But the truth is, recovery can't be measured in songs or interviews. It's measured in quiet nights, in choices no one sees, in the long stretches of self-doubt that fame never cures. Nicole carried that burden too, though she rarely spoke about it. Friends say she became a master of calm. When Keith was on tour, she focused on family. When she was filming, she made sure her children never saw the exhaustion behind her smile. She once said that she believed in showing love, not talking about it. And that's what she did. Quietly, consistently, for years. While magazines speculated about glamour, what really held their marriage together was invisible: forgiveness, patience, and faith. But fame has a way of eroding even the strongest walls. As Keith's tours grew larger and Nicole's career entered new heights with films like Lion and Big Little Lies, the two were again pulled in opposite directions. He chased music across continents. She chased stories across screens. They tried to meet in the middle, but the middle kept moving. Yet, through it all, she smiled. Every red carpet moment, every award speech, that same serene smile, calm and composed. To many, it looked like happiness. To those who looked closer, it looked like survival. Because sometimes the calmest expressions hide the loudest storms. In Hollywood, silence is often mistaken for peace. But Nicole Kidman's silence was something else. A kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing too much and saying too little. Friends who worked with her describe her as graceful, almost reserved. She never spoke badly of anyone, never complained. When reporters asked personal questions, she would gently deflect. When gossip magazines speculated about tension, she stayed silent. That silence wasn't denial, it was love. She believed privacy was the last form of protection they still had. But every secret, even one born from love, has a weight. The late-night interviews, the red carpet absences, the lonely hotel rooms while Keith toured, they began to show in subtle ways. Her laughter became softer, her eyes quieter. Yet she kept moving forward, determined not to let the cracks show. In one interview, years later, she said something that would linger in the minds of fans. When you love someone, you fight for them until you can't. It was a simple line, delivered with calm, but it carried the kind of truth that only comes from experience. And as the years rolled on, those words would become prophetic. By the late 2010s, they had survived what many couples never could: addiction, distance, the unrelenting pace of fame. They raised children, built a home in Nashville, and for a time seemed stronger than ever. But love doesn't always break in public. Sometimes it fades quietly in the spaces between two busy lives. The laughter that once filled their home began to dim. The phone calls grew shorter, the red carpet moments fewer. They were still partners, still parents. But somewhere along the way, the connection that had once felt electric became polite. It wasn't betrayal or anger that divided them. It was time. And when time becomes the distance between two hearts, even love can start to feel like memory. If you're still listening, you already feel it too. The calm before everything changes. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter reveals the moment when that silence finally broke. Every great love story faces a test. For Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, that test came just 4 months after their vows. The world saw a new bride, radiant and deeply in love, her hand resting gently on her husband's arm at premieres. But behind those red carpet smiles, a private war was being fought, one that nearly ended everything before it ever began. In October 2006, the headlines broke quietly. Keith Urban had entered rehab. The news spread fast, shocking fans who had seen him as the golden boy of country music. Talented, charming, grounded. But addiction doesn't care about charm or success. It creeps in quietly, then suddenly takes everything. For Keith, it wasn't new. It was a shadow that had followed him since his early years in Nashville. The price of chasing perfection under the weight of fame. For Nicole, it was a nightmare she didn't see coming. She had just found happiness again after years of heartbreak. And now, 4 months into her marriage, she was faced with the terrifying reality of losing it all. But she didn't run. She did what she's always done. She stayed calm, she acted with heart, and she fought for love. According to multiple reports, Nicole was the one who staged an intervention, surrounding Keith with close friends and quietly convincing him to seek help. It wasn't about image or damage control. It was about survival. She wanted the man she loved back. Healthy, whole, and alive. Keith later revealed that her love saved him. In an interview years later, he confessed, "She's the one who saved my life." Those words weren't for publicity. They were truth. While Keith entered treatment, Nicole canceled appearances, stepped back from public life, and turned her focus completely toward him. She shielded him from the press, ignored gossip, and gave him space to heal. It was an act of love, but also an act of immense emotional labor. Because behind the strength, there's always a cost. Recovery is never simple. It's not a moment, it's a process. And for every step forward, there are days when the past still whispers. Keith Urban was determined to rebuild himself, but fame doesn't allow many quiet spaces to heal. The cameras never truly go away. When he returned to the stage, fans cheered. The comeback was seen as redemption, the prodigal star rising again. But for Nicole, the applause wasn't comfort. She knew that recovery doesn't end when the curtain drops. There were late nights, constant travel, and the lingering fear that old habits might return. She carried that fear in silence. Friends say she was protective, not possessive, but quietly watchful. She didn't lecture him or control him. She supported him. That's what love looks like when you're married to someone battling inner demons. She showed up for him, even when it meant fading into the background. In interviews, she never mentioned the struggle. She never sought sympathy. She never made his pain her storyline. That silence became her strength and her shield. Keith's recovery inspired some of his most personal music. Songs about redemption, love, and second chances filled his albums. Fans adored it. They saw a man transformed. But transformation, even when real, doesn't erase the past. It lingers in quiet ways. In hesitation, in trust rebuilt one day at a time. For Nicole, those years were the quiet years, filled with cautious hope, careful balance, and constant forgiveness. The world called it perfection. She knew better. Behind closed doors, marriage meant patience, the kind that doesn't make headlines. It meant putting your career on pause to keep your family together. It meant carrying emotional weight so the person you love can stand again. Keith Urban once said that his addiction blew our marriage to smithereens. But what the world often forgets is that Nicole Kidman picked up every shattered piece and built it back quietly. That kind of love isn't glamorous. It's exhausting. Still, she never complained. She believed in healing, in grace, in second chances. But the truth about second chances is simple. They only work if both hearts stay open. In the years that followed, their marriage seemed stronger than ever. The tabloids praised their resilience, their renewed faith in each other. They appeared together at awards shows, their smiles radiant, their hands intertwined. They spoke about gratitude, growth, and love. Keith thanked her in acceptance speeches. Nicole spoke of partnership and devotion. It looked perfect again. But perfection can be fragile, especially in a world that demands constant proof of happiness. Behind the soft smiles, distance began creeping back in. Not the physical kind, but the quiet emotional one that comes when two people start living separate rhythms. Keith was back on tour, months at a time, moving from city to city, stage to stage. Nicole was diving into new roles, pouring herself into characters that mirrored her own quiet pain. Rabbit Hole, The Paperboy, Big Little Lies. Stories of women surviving love, loss, and the weight of silence. Fans admired her performances for their emotional depth. What few realized was that much of that depth came from real life. Art was her therapy. Acting was her refuge. During this time, people around her noticed something subtle. A shift. Nicole was still radiant, still composed, but her smile had changed. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was restraint. A quietness in her that hadn't been there before. She had become the keeper of peace. the one who balanced everything. And balancing love under pressure is like walking a tightrope in heels. It looks effortless from the outside, but one wrong step can send everything tumbling. For Keith, there was guilt. For Nicole, there was patience. She forgave, she encouraged, she stood still while he chased the spotlight, all while keeping her own world steady. That's the thing about love at that level. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's about the little things you do to keep something from breaking. She once said in an interview, "I'm a deeply emotional person. I feel things strongly, but I've learned to carry them quietly." Those words defined her, because even when her heart was heavy, she carried it with grace. By the late 2010s, the world had turned Nicole and Keith into symbols, proof that love could survive addiction, distance, and fame. They were admired, even idolized. But what no one saw was how much energy it took to maintain that image. Every red carpet appearance was rehearsed composure, every smile a small victory, every silence a choice. In private, she was a wife and mother trying to hold her family together. In public, she was a global icon, calm, poised, impenetrable. And in between those two versions of herself was a woman slowly growing tired. Tired of pretending that love was easy. Tired of holding her breath through every storm. Tired of smiling when her heart needed rest. But she never let the world see that exhaustion. Because in Hollywood, grace isn't just admired, it's demanded. By now, Nicole Kidman had mastered the art of grace under pressure. Every public appearance was perfectly measured. Elegant but restrained. When journalists asked about Keith, she smiled. When gossip writers speculated, she stayed silent. It wasn't denial, it was control. Control over her story, her dignity, her peace. She understood that in Hollywood, once you open the door to gossip, you can never close it again. So she locked it. She kept her private life private. Not because she was cold, but because she had learned what happens when the world turns your pain into headlines. Her silence became her legacy. Friends described her as gentle but distant, open yet unreachable. She was kind, professional, and deeply loyal, but always in control of what she shared. The more private she became, the more mysterious she seemed. And that mystery became her armor, because the truth is, behind that mystery was pain. Pain she never wanted to weaponize. Pain she refused to exploit. She wasn't hiding a scandal. She was protecting a love that was slowly losing its rhythm. The irony of fame is that the more you're loved by the world, the more isolated you can feel. For Nicole and Keith, that paradox became real. They had fame, fortune, family, yet somehow connection became harder to hold on to. He lived on stage. She lived in character. They were both surrounded by millions, but more often than not, they were alone. Nicole once said, "When you love someone, you keep fighting, until one day you realize you're fighting alone." That realization doesn't come with anger. It comes with quiet acceptance. And as time passed, she began to understand that love sometimes changes form. It doesn't always end in betrayal. Sometimes it just fades. By 2020, fans began to notice small shifts. Fewer public appearances together, shorter red carpet moments, separate interviews. Rumors started swirling, as they always do. But Nicole said nothing. Not because there was something to hide, but because she knew silence was the only thing she could still control. She had learned that sometimes dignity means saying nothing at all, and that's what made her different from so many others in Hollywood. She never needed to expose anyone to prove her pain. She simply endured, because true grace isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and unbreakable, even when the heart behind it is. If you're still here, you've seen how love can survive storms, and how silence can become strength. Don't forget to subscribe. 19 years. That's how long they tried to hold on to something that the world believed was unbreakable. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't fall apart overnight. They unraveled quietly, piece by piece, between the music, the movies, and the miles. There were no villains here, just two people who loved each other deeply, until love stopped being enough. And maybe that's what makes their story unforgettable. Not the heartbreak, but the grace with which they faced it. Because sometimes strength isn't in holding on, it's in knowing when to let go. Softly, with love still in your heart. Hollywood may move on, but the echo of this love story will linger. A reminder that even the brightest lights can't hide what's real.